Welcome to Passport to Wealth, the podcast for U.S. expats ready to take charge of their finances while living abroad. I'm your host, Arielle Tucker, a certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and fellow expat, here to help you navigate the complexities of cross-border life with clarity and confidence. Good morning and welcome back to Passport to Wealth. Today we're joined by Alex Ingrim, CEO of Liberty Atlantic Advisors, a firm dedicated to supporting U.S. expats across Europe. As a seasoned cross-border financial advisor, Alex has spent years helping Americans navigate the complexities of living, working, and investing abroad. His firsthand experience as a U.S. expat gives him a unique perspective on both the opportunities and challenges of life overseas. While Liberty Atlantic serves clients throughout Europe, today we're focusing our conversation on where Alex currently calls home, Italy. With a deep understanding of both U.S. and Italian financial systems, Alex helps bridge the gap for expats, ensuring they make the most of their finances while avoiding costly mistakes. We'll be tapping into his expertise to explore everything from daily life in Italy to the big picture planning strategies that make an expat's transition smoother, more secure, and more rewarding. Alex, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So, Alex, it's been really fun to get to know you over the last, couple of years. And we actually refer out to you guys a lot because our firm, Connected Financial Planning, we don't serve U.S. expats in Italy. And you guys have been a great resource because you are an expat in Italy. And so I'm really curious, what actually first brought you to Italy?
Yeah, so we've had a long, winding road through Europe, but eventually we ended up in Italy because my father-in-law was Italian. So he was from northern Italy. So as our children were getting a little bit older and we had to think about school and where to raise them and kind of have a final resting place for our family and for the kids to grow up, we thought Italy would be a great option.
Oh, that's great. And I just want to clarify, you are an American citizen. You are a U.S. passport holder. And
Yeah.
I understand, you guys have lived throughout Europe. So run me through the countries you've actually lived in beyond Italy.
So my wife and I together have lived in Canada, the UK, France, Malta, and now Italy is our latest.
So I'm curious. It sounds like your family, part of your family is Italian, but what is kind of one thing or maybe a few things about Italian life that you wish you'd known before moving there?
Yeah, it sounds pretty random, but this is one that I always quote, the cuisine. So obviously we all have an idea in our head of what Italian cuisine looks like. It's very regional, which I knew from my father-in-law because my father-in-law didn't even know about dishes that existed 100 miles away from him because it's so regional. But in Tuscany, where we live, it's extremely kind of meat heavy. And I never realized that before moving there. So I had this idea of pasta, pizza, the typical things we think of as Americans. And then moving to Florence, it ended up being a lot of steak, a lot of sausage, a lot of barbecues. And that would have probably been a lot less surprising if I had visited more, someone told me about it previously.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I would also have thought that Italy would be so meat heavy. And is it because they do different courses? Is every meal different courses and this is just the meat course and there's a more emphasis on the meat course versus the pasta course, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's definitely because of the different courses. And then it's just kind of like the culture in Tuscany is centered around farming and meat raising as well. But I think it's like a meat, vegetables, and pasta type of cuisine, which we think the pasta comes first. And in reality, sometimes it's, it comes first because it's literally primi, first course, but it's also kind of not the main focus in certain Italian regions, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I'm curious, as you've transitioned to Italy, raising your family in Italy, how does the pace of raising a family and just your lifestyle, how does that compare to the US?
Yeah, it's a lot slower. When I'm talking with my friends back in the US, we often kind of have this conversation and comparisons, and it feels like I'm raising my kids in kind of 90s America, right? Where things are much slower. I feel like the internet and kind of the rush of information doesn't have as much of an impact in Italy. We don't have kind of a cable news cycle or constant noise, which now children are becoming more attuned to. So it is much slower. Things are much more intentional and deliberate. So that's really refreshing. The weekends are really for families, which is another thing that's really helpful and important. Just being able to carve out that family time and have that dedicated space for your family feels really unique and precious in today's world.
I completely agree with you. And that's actually a theme, regardless of where we're interviewing US expats in Europe. That theme of family time comes up over and over again. And I say the same thing to my family. I'm like, I imagine raising my kids in Switzerland and I say the 70s, not that I was even alive in
Yeah.
the 70s, but I say the 70s because I imagine it's like kids are like biking themselves to school. I mean, today is our last week of summer holiday here. My kids were like, we'll just take ourselves to camp today. And I'm like, wow, we would be arrested for this in America. Like,
Yeah.
my kids are 8 and 13, riding the train alone, biking around town alone. And it's totally accepted, encouraged, and that's the norm. And I feel
Yeah.
so lucky to have that, like that community safety aspect here.
Oh,
And yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in Italy, if you're 13 and you're not taking yourself to school, like riding the bus alone, like the city bus, it's kind of weird. You see middle schoolers riding the city bus to school all the time, every day.
Yeah, I know. Imagine a system where you can use public transportation for the school kids and
I know.
everyone else. I mean, wow, how efficient would that be?
I know.
Are there any other kind of cultural norms? I mean, especially we both work in finance, thinking about money and the work culture. What kind of differences do you see there as well?
Yeah, I think the big one, and again, this is across Europe. It's maybe more of like a non-American thing rather than a particularly Italian thing. But really, you don't talk about your job and you don't talk about money very often at all. So it's not a normal conversation with friends or with people that you're socializing with to talk about what you do for work. It's
Okay, so you
it's
go to a party, you go to a cocktail party, you go to an
yeah.
apéro, and you say, "Hi, my name is," and then you say, "What do you do for work?" So that question doesn't happen.
Never, never. I mean, there are people that I know socially that I have no idea really what they do for work because I've never asked them and it's never come up in conversation. So it's not, there's much less emphasis on your working life. And then obviously that has an impact on money, right? Because if your working life is kind of de-emphasized with the rest of your life, then to a certain degree, so is money, right? You're not trying to climb a career ladder. You're not putting that as a priority in your life. So then, therefore, money is not necessarily going to be a priority in your life or finances. So I think that's one key thing. And then I think what goes along with that as well is just the emphasis that Italian culture places on passing assets down to your children. So there is not really a lot of talk about retirement planning. There isn't a lot of talk about getting on the housing ladder. And the reasons for that are that, typically Italians are living at home until they have a reason to move out, which, we've all heard that stereotype, right? And that's pretty consistent across Southern Europe. But then also a lot
Does
of,
that go for both genders as well?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think in Italy, the stereotype's much more for men than it is for women.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm asking. I'm like,
Yes.
is it are women are also not moving out? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of people aren't moving out. And if they are, they might be moving into another apartment that their grandparents own. So that's pretty typical for like upper middle class Italians in big cities. Or, your retirement planning isn't the main focus because sometimes assets are getting passed down from parents or from different generations. So when you have housing security and you're not as concerned about retirement planning, just because of intergenerational wealth and the state welfare system, then it's a completely different conversation about money, right? It's a completely different conversation about your career.
Yeah, and so how do you navigate that? Because I imagine that you're working with a lot of families where maybe you have one Italian citizen and one US citizen. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, how do you kind of bridge that gap?
Well, I mean, I think we start it probably from the US perspective, just because there's so much more to cover, right? So you're talking about all of the things that are important in a very US context, like housing security, retirement planning, healthcare planning, long-term care. And a lot of the times, what ends up happening is that those things are either assumed to be taken care of, or, that couple or that family unit has had a conversation about it already. And that's one of the driving forces behind the move, particularly when someone is Italian. So it might be the fact that they're retiring early and they know they can get healthcare in Italy, whereas they'd have to purchase it in the US as an early retiree. But if we fill in the US gaps, then there's a lot less to cover on the Italian side, right? And usually, Italians that are returning from the US or have a US partner, they're usually really aware of what the complications are in the US, and they're very aware of how much easier it is in Italy on the other side.
What are some of the most common planning mistakes then that you see when Americans are moving to Italy?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost always around taxes, right? So it's not understanding the way that US assets are going to be taxed in Italy. And I think there's also, so that comes in two ways. One is making an assumption that you're not going to be taxed in Italy on things like Social Security or IRA distributions. So that's one big assumption that's false. You are going to be taxed in Italy on those income streams. It is going to affect your budgeting. It might affect your quality of life. So that's one key piece. So making a wrong assumption, but it's also overemphasizing the wrong things. So a lot of people hear that Italy has a wealth tax and they get really concerned and they start thinking that's going to affect my ability to live in Italy. In reality, that's usually not what impacts your budgeting or your ability to move. What impacts your budgeting or ability to move is making the wrong assumptions about taxes. So it's those two things working hand in hand that are usually the biggest mistake. It's almost like DIY tax planning when you're not a tax lawyer, right? Like that, that's the biggest mistake people make.
No, I mean, in our own practice, that's exactly, we see those same mistakes, just
Sure.
kind of like the assumption that I'm not going to be taxed because all my assets are in the US, therefore they don't move with me to my new country. That's false. That the US is no longer going to tax you because you now live in a different country. I mean, I would say like most of our conversations, tax is in that conversation as a US expat. And there's just so many false, incorrect assumptions. And that's really because it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. Like there's nothing logical about being a US expat. And Alex, honestly, that's why we have jobs. I mean, it's our job to guide people and just be like, this is the reality of the situation that you're working with. And this is what you need to know so that we can optimize your situation for your life and also for your taxes, because it's not really just about taxes. It's so much more. You don't move to Italy to like save money on taxes. At least that's my assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've heard anecdotally so many stories of people moving and then leaving because they got the tax piece wrong. So it impacts their entire ability to live there.
Yeah. And I've heard about a number of different like tax incentives through Italy. And I'm curious, like, do you want to highlight anything that's particularly interesting for US expats who are looking to move to Italy that maybe would make sense for them to look into further?
Yeah, absolutely. So out of all of the countries that we work in, I think we feel like Italy has the most solutions to tax problems overall. So when somebody says, I'm looking to move to Italy, we can find a solution often to a broad range of situations. So it's in part of it's tax incentives, but the other part is just the way that the Italian tax code was built. It offers ways for people that are self-employed or that own businesses, options for reducing their tax liability. And some of that's because we happen to be expats, but a lot of it's just domestic Italian tax policy too. So the incentives are really interesting. For retirees, there's the 7% flat tax scheme in Southern Italy. That's contingent on fulfilling a lot of criteria. So moving to a small town of less than 20,000 inhabitants in what's considered Southern Italy. So in the regions that are considered Southern Italy and Sardinia and Sicily too. So that's a 7% tax on kind of everything, right? Whether it's retirement income, capital gains tax. So it covers a broad range of situations. Wealth tax doesn't apply when you have the 7% tax scheme. So the important thing to understand about Italy is that is a tax incentive. It's not an immigration incentive. So they are completely separate. Like in most countries, tax and immigration are completely separate. So you still have to fulfill immigration requirements in order to then move to one of those places. And the other big criteria is you have to be in receipt of a foreign pension. So a lot of times that means taking IRA distributions or having filed for Social Security. So you need to be a foreign pensioner for that to apply. So that's one big one. The other one's for people that are still working and they get a 50% tax deduction on their earned income for 5 years. Again, you have to fulfill immigration criteria separately, but being taxed on, 75,000 instead of 150,000, when that's your earned income is a really big incentive. That used to be a much bigger incentive. They changed the rules heading into 2024. And that's not contingent on geography. So you've got either it's called the impatriate, the 50% tax deduction, or the 7% flat tax on foreign pensioners. So you've got some really good tax incentives there.
Yeah, those sound really great. And what are the top Italian tax rates right now, just to kind of set the stage for people?
43% above 50,000 euros. So
yeah, that's a
yeah.
big haircut. And do the rates change based on the different regions you're in, or is it just a federal tax system?
No, there are regional taxes, but they're usually small enough and the differences are small enough that you're like talking about 2% added on rather than, something that's like California where 7.
Yeah, California, New York. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then same with the wealth tax, is that like a federal or is that a regional?
It's federal. Yeah. So, and I mean, that really applies to the type of asset that you have. So Italy's really funny, like bank accounts really don't have, you could have $5 million in a bank account and it's not really going to be taxed. Where if you have that $5 million in the taxable brokerage account, that's going to be taxed. So, and it just to clarify, like these taxes apply whether you have foreign assets or Italian assets, but it's often automatically deducted if you have Italian assets, so an Italian bank account or Italian brokerage account. Whereas when you have foreign accounts, you have to self-declare and pay yourself. And that's the big difference. So I say that it's not like so much a wealth tax, is that it's a tax that occurs in the background in Italy anyway, and it's applied on foreign accounts just to make it equitable with the rest of the system.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. We in Switzerland, we also have a wealth tax, and it's the same. It's just, it wouldn't be a reason to not move to Switzerland if you're really looking to move to Switzerland for other reasons. So when Americans are moving abroad, are you seeing people who are kind of close to retirement or self-employed? What's kind of like the profile that you're seeing right now, people moving to Italy?
Italy's always been different than everywhere else. And I think that's because of the close connection that the US and Italy have. It's because of how many Italian Americans that there are just generally, and the access that Americans previously had to get Italian passports. So
Yeah.
that
I think actually, can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that was a really big update.
Yeah. So, there used to be a kind of citizenship by descent within Italy that made it quite easy to get an Italian passport if your grandparents or great grandparents had immigrated from Italy elsewhere and they had not intentionally chosen to be a citizen of another country, which for a lot of Italian immigrants in the late 19th, early 20th century, they didn't intentionally choose to become American. There was no like naturalization process. They just ended up becoming Americans. So this bloodline kind of continued throughout their descendants. So, your parents could be Italian citizens, you could be an Italian citizen. And so a lot of Americans, I think the figure was well over 10 million, were eligible for Italian citizenship. And a lot of people, once they realized that, started the process and took it up. And, it kind of ended up that there were probably more people eligible for Italian citizenship outside of Italy than inside of Italy. And as a result, and I think for a variety of other reasons, Italy recently amended the laws. I think late May, they amended the rule so that they essentially stopped your kind of ancestry going back that far. I think now it has to be your grandparents, and you have to have real connections to Italy, because there were probably millions of Italian citizens that had never set foot in Italy.
Oh, we have friends and clients who've done this. And it
Yeah.
was just such an amazing opportunity. If you were an American and your grandparents or great grandparents just happened to be Italian, you could just get a passport. You had never gone to
Yeah.
Italy, didn't speak Italian. I was like so jealous. I
Yeah.
was like, why are we Italian? It was such
Oh
a
yeah.
great little kind of like loophole into getting an EU passport. I mean,
Yeah.
really a great opportunity. So it is unfortunate that that program closed, but completely understandable.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So I'm curious, do you have clients who are reaching out to you who have been in Italy for a couple of years and now they're like, you know what, it looks like we're going to be in Italy long term. Can we start some, cross-border planning? I'm a US citizen. And how do you serve them or support them after they've been in Italy for a couple of years?
Yeah, yeah, we get that pretty regularly. I mean, it's really the same process as we'd go through with anyone who is looking to move to Europe. We often work with people that have been resident in country for years. Sometimes there's people that have been in Italy for 30 years. And they're just trying to get their head around retirement planning for the first time because they moved in their 20s. So we take them through the same process. It's the same framework as any kind of retirement plan. Um, but the available solutions are much less because you are now within the Italian system. You need to work within the confines of the system. American solutions don't really work in Italy. American planning in general doesn't have the same tools or like really solutions that you would use in Italy. They're completely mismatched systems, as mismatched almost as you can get, much more so than any other country that we work in. So you really have to look at things from a different perspective when someone's been Italian tax resident already. You have to look at it from, hey, we've got fewer paths available to us, but what kind of preferential outcomes can we achieve if we're just looking for tax optimization? Or if we're just looking at budgeting in retirement, or just when you can retire. I mean, that's probably the most common question that we answer for people that have been in Italy is, when can I retire? Like I'm ready to move on. And that's important regardless of where you live. I think that's the one question that cuts through every situation, in every country we work in, is just, when can I retire?
I think we see that as well in our practice. And I always tell people, if you are just starting to planning before you're a resident is so important, especially when we're talking about moving into these high tax countries like Italy is 43%. That's a big haircut.
Yeah.
Planning in advance is so, so important. Even if you're just starting to think about moving and maybe you're going on a scouting trip or maybe you're planning on doing 6 months. I mean, make sure you understand, what are the residency? When will I trigger residency? There's a really layered kind of intersection of immigration rights, residency considerations. I mean, all these things have to be put together, and you have to understand what you're doing. So very important to talk to someone like you and your team ahead of time. I guess one thing that I'm curious if you'll spend like 1 or 2 minutes, I know that's not much time, expanding on, is the Italian Social Security system. And can you highlight any of the differences between like US Social Security versus Italian Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is in the US, you're fully insured after 10 years, right? And so after 10 years of work in the US, you're going to get some kind of retirement benefit. And I think we do this comparison a lot because Italy is one of the few countries where actually the totalization agreement, so the agreement between the US and Italy about social security benefits, is way different than every other country. So if you're self-employed in Italy and you're a US citizen, you have an obligation to continue in the US system.
Oh,
And
very
so,
interesting.
yeah, so it's actually like a tax optimization technique too, in Italy. So we make that comparison a lot because there are some situations where people have a choice, like if you're a dual citizen. And we like to say that, like, in the US system, you become fully insured at 10 years, so that's really a good benefit. The cap out, like, on your earnings is relatively similar, to be honest. There is a cap, like a maximum at which Social Security tax will be applied. So it's lower in Italy, but the Social Security tax rate is higher in Italy than it is in the US. Whereas in Italy, the tax rate is lower, but the cap is higher. So they're very similar as far as contributions. It's just we feel like in the US, you get more out for what you put in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really consistent, across a variety of different countries. And people take that for granted, is that the US has a really generous system for what we've contributed. So I think, that's one thing to be conscious of. The other, when we've done some IMPS projections with clients, so IMPS is the Italian Social Security system, is that, the longer that you work and the more that you're a high earner, this is the case in the US, but it's not as impactful. The longer that you work and the more that you're a high earner, the bigger the impact it has on your benefit. Meaning the opposite is true. If you're a low earner that didn't work for very long, you're going to end up with very little. And so the divergence and kind of like the volatility of outcomes in Italy is much higher than it is in the US. In the US, it really feels more like a security blanket. And Americans don't want to hear that because we think that our system is broken and there's a lot wrong with it, but there's also a lot that's right with it. And I think acknowledging that, like, a lot of people can live on Social Security alone in Italy. That's way different. You talk to an Italian and they're almost never dreaming of living on IMPS.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we see that in a variety of different European countries as well. But I think you made a really good point to highlight the social security systems country by country are very different. The treaties country by country are very different. That was something new for me. I didn't know that a U.S. citizen who's self-employed would potentially be still contributing to U.S. Social Security. That was my new thing that I learned today. So thank you so much for giving us a few minutes on that. Okay. Final question for today. What is one piece of advice that you could offer an inspiring U.S. expat looking to move to Italy?
Plan, but don't rush into things, right? Don't rush into things on so many levels. Planning the logistics around the move, understanding the culture. Don't rush into or feel pressured to accomplish a lot of things very quickly when you're trying to plan a move. And then when you get to Italy, don't feel like you have to judge whether your move is a success or a failure within the first 6 months or a year. I've lived in a lot of places. My wife and I always say, give it 2 years. You need to really give yourself 2 years to understand if a move has been successful, to give yourself enough kind of 20/20 vision into the past to kind of take a look at what you've done right or what you've done wrong, things that might be your fault, things that might not be. So just don't rush and don't be too hard on yourself. There's really no reason for it. Take your time to plan a successful move. And once you get there, just take some time to also understand the culture and your place within it.
I think that's such an important piece of advice. I always tell people the first year is just settling. And I've known so many expats who that first year is literally hell. They hate it. They're wondering why they made the move. They are totally miserable. They don't have friends. They don't have their community. And then they get into year 2 and all of a sudden they're like, oh wait, actually I love it here and I'm never leaving. So it's really important to, if you're going to make the move, to allow yourself to get time and a lot of grace to get through that first year, because it can be really hard. And if you just kind of rush out and make this, oh no, it's not it, this isn't it, then you can miss out on it. It actually really is your place. It just needed a little bit more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and insights in Italy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
The content shared in this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial, tax, or legal advice. We encourage you to consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, or other licensed expert before making any decisions based on the topics discussed. Everyone's financial situation is unique, and personalized guidance from a trusted professional is the best way to ensure your choices align with your individual goals and circumstances.